Hi, it's Doug DeVitri with the CoTrack Pro podcast. And today I've been waiting for this one. This one's all about domestic violence support. We have an expert here, Tracy Curtis. She's going to share a lot of things that'll be useful to you if you're in this field. Welcome, Tracy, to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Doug.
So let's talk about this topic of domestic violence, right? Because there are many ways that abuser can abuse someone. And even before we get into it, if you feel comfortable, can you kind of share how you got into this as one of your professional roles?
Most definitely. So, when I was in undergraduate school, my undergrad's in psychology. And the thing of it is they don't teach you a lot about domestic violence in any of the human services degree programs, nursing, whatever it shall be. So, I'm in my undergraduate, and I was literally that meme when you start Googling someone's behavior, that's your first red flag. I was with my fiance for 3 years, and I had lived experience with domestic abuse. Obviously, I didn't have the terminology, I didn't have the language, but I was kind of seeing a pattern. Like with most survivors, I kind of took it upon myself that it was me. We weren't communicating well. So that kind of led me into finishing my bachelor's, getting out of the relationship, and kind of just taking a really hard look, but also doing a lot of self study, self learning about domestic abuse. And that's what led me into my current role. I started a DV education with an agency, and it kind of took me down a path and kept growing. I in graduate school, I had my master's in forensic psychology in graduate school. That gave me the patterns and made me just have a deeper understanding of what was going on. And so when I started my role, it helped immensely.
Well, sure. And I think a lot of people who kind of experience this as a victim and there's not any physical scars, right? People might think that you're okay, right? Or maybe you're too sensitive.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of these abusive behaviors that might not necessarily be physical, but very damaging, not just to the parents, but to the kids.
Absolutely. With that, when I was a few months into my role, obviously still doing research, this domestic violence is ever evolving. There's new things that come out, new um, developments as far as interventions. So I always have to kind of keep current on everything so I can keep my education current. With that being said, I fell into Dr. Evan Stark in coercive control. And as more as I was reading his book, I started reading another book by another psychologist that really kind of broke it down in a non scholarly way. It was a great book. I recommend it to individuals now. And I was like, wow, because I didn't think abuse was happening to me because I didn't really have the physical. It didn't turn that way toward until the end. And so this concept of coercive control, I just kind of took off and I'm like, this is it. This is our key piece of what we are missing. This is why victims don't just leave. This is why they recant in court. It's such a huge underpinning of what domestic abuse is and what actually goes on a daily basis in those relationships.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Well, you've got your master's degree in forensic psychology, right? And one of those things is, I guess, you're looking into the patterns that can be completely destructive, right? Can you give us some examples that might not necessarily be visible to the naked eye?
Well, and I think this is where survivors are so misunderstood. It starts out so covertly, and it's, oh, I was just joking. Oh, are you going to wear that? It's the small, just kind of tactics that they kind of start to bring the victim down. And then you start to kind of doubt yourself. And through the relationship, I mean, an abuser will kind of put something out there to break a boundary. If they're able to break that, then they just kind of keep going with it. And before you know, you don't even know who you are anymore. You are, what in the heck has happened here? And you're kind of like, well, like I said, I just didn't understand the pattern because it was more of this coercive control. It's not that physical, so it is so misunderstood. It's misunderstood in the United States. There's not a lot of states that have this criminalized. So that's where I took this piece because I want people to understand survivors, and it's a lot of psychological that they endure.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's the mental drain that can happen, right? Because, if you go to an advocate for support, that individual probably has to go back to court and then get re-traumatized again from the
Abs-
situation. So how do you maintain this balance of getting support and healing while you continuously are hurt?
you know, and it's no knock to any mental health professionals, but when I do a lot of advocacy work on my own. I was working in Illinois, I live here in Indiana, so I did a lot of just self advocacy for survivors here. With that being said, I mean, I can detect the patterns of what's going on just as they're trying to talk to me. It is so re-traumatizing because in Indiana and Illinois, they've only criminalized that physical or sexual abuse. So, in all actuality, law enforcement can step in, and a lot of them don't understand coercive control. But then again, their hands are tied because what are they going to charge for? There's no marks. And this is where we're missing. This is where the disconnect is because this coercive control continues to amp up and escalates, especially if there's been system involvement. But kind of back to what I was saying, we really, DV specialists, the counselors, the agencies at work, they really do understand what that survivor's going through. And even going maybe to a mental health professional that doesn't specialize in that, that can still be re-traumatizing. People say things that can come off as victim blaming. They're not intentional whatsoever. But that's where I want to stop that because that creates a barrier for the victim to leave. Because if no one understands her, they're not going to be believed. Why are they going to go? This is just my reality. I'll just stay here.
Sure, the victim's the crazy one, right? The
Yes,
victim one,
yes,
the victim one has to go to a health therapist for help,
yep,
and then all of a sudden, that mental health is then weaponized, right? To say that look,
abs,
we said you were unstable. Look, so
yes.
how's somebody supposed to get help when the very help they're supposed to seek now becomes a weapon to hurt them?
Absolutely. And this is kind of another of the platforms that I try and speak on. I'm like, you need to understand that these are trauma responses. We don't need to pathologize that. They're normal responses. And that's what I tell survivors because they're like, oh, well, I know I'm just too crazy about this, or maybe I'm overthinking that. I'm like, you're not. You're conditioned to think that about yourself. These are normal trauma responses. What you're living on the daily is not normal behavior. These are trauma responses. And if we pathologize that, it can just make it 10 times worse for the survivor.
Well, sure. I mean, there's no support then if they can't, if it's and then I can imagine it must be difficult on the police, right? Because they didn't see what happened. All they can go off of evidence, which you can't see. So, like, what would you recommend to those advocates, right, who really, really care about this situation where the people are coming in for support and
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging them as a trauma-informed specialist? To reassure them that, what, you're doing everything that you can, because a lot of times there's a lot of self-doubt that's a part of that.
Absolutely. And when they're involved in the systems, whoever it may, whoever it is, the judicial system, with, reverting back to, well, we don't see anything physical, we're looking at incidents. We have to look at the pattern of what she's telling us to advocate for these survivors. It's very survivor centered because even though the tactics may be the same, their abuser is different and they're the expert on their abuser. So we're there to support, we're there to empower them because all of their control has been taken away, to start to know it's okay to make your own choices again. Give them that autonomy back. They've had everything taken away from them. And that kind of gives them the strength that builds the resilience that they are going to need to kind of get through this process.
Sure. Well, when it comes to the legal side, right, it can be really, really sticky because you might have professionals, right, with best intentions, right, and helping their client, but then it's the child who the client might get what they want, but it's the child that suffers the most. Now, how do we go about educating attorneys and parents to where this is less than an issue?
Number one, I mean, my biggest thing is watch the language. Don't soften that language. We need to let them know because I think in family courts, a lot of this gets termed as high conflict divorces. That kind of makes it sound like it's mutual. This is one sided, and
Mm.
abusers are able to manipulate the system as well, especially if they've already been like, see, I told you she was crazy. They've pathologized her. They need to be able to, and there's experts out there. Um, there's one psychologist that does work a lot with the family court system. So there are specialists, and those are the majority of the advocacy calls that I get. They're already out of the relationship, and now they're experiencing this post separation abuse, and
Mm.
it's through the legal system and in family courts. I've had, guardian ad litems are like, well, you know what? I'm listening to him because you're crazy. I mean, it's just the dynamics of that. And if we can start to pull that apart and break it down for what it really is, exactly what she's enduring, because once that relationship ends on paper, if it's a divorce, she can be drugged through the courts for years after, especially if there's children. And it does impact the kids. Kids don't have to see physical violence. They can hear, they can see, the survivor being so tense and on edge. They can know that. And their little brains are very malleable. They're still developing. So that can turn into PTSD for them. And abuse is a learned behavior. So we want to pull them out of those situations. So, there's that increase where maybe one child could become an abuser, the other child could become the victim. So we want to be able to pull them out of that. And we need to get back to the court systems and let them know exactly what is going on as far as the pattern and not so much just an incident.
Sure. Well, I have people who contact me as part of CoTrack Pro and telling me just horrible, horrible things that are happening, and it's not gender specific, right? I
Not at
used
all.
I used to think, they don't like dads, but then again, I see a mom who's going through the same exact thing, and there's one common denominator is that the victim is the one who has less money.
Yes, because they've already established that power by dynamic, that power imbalance in the relationship, and even post that there's probably been financial abuse. Maybe he's gotten her fired from her job, maybe he's not letting her work. These are all a choice made by an abuser, and very in tactics with intent. They know what they're doing. So she has no money. What's going to happen after the abuse or after the divorce, or they're in family courts? He's going to be able to pay the guardian ad litem. He's going to be able to pay the attorneys. And she is, who does she have to defend her? Because obviously defense takes money. So it's all forethought and with intent that these abusers do make those uh, uh, kind of do those tactics with the survivors.
Sure. I mean, the research that I saw a few weeks ago said that 75% of Americans represent themselves pro se, and with 90% of them, if they're going back to modified child support, 92% of them are doing it pro se. So, at what point, and again, this is more about domestic violence, but how do we prevent the this from being a subscription that families never really intended to sign up for, right? Because they have to keep paying, 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 or they represent themselves until, there's nothing left to take.
You know, I have worked with several of the victims over here, and I have just tried to make connections. There's a couple really good attorneys that get it, and they understand that post separation abuse, that coercive control that is used, and maybe they'll work with the survivor. I think you really, again, it just boils down to these professionals, legal professionals, attorneys, guardian ad litems, anybody that is involved with the you know, child system there. They really have to understand this, or this is how it's going to spin out of control. And what does the survivor have? It's just constant money after money. So I've met with a couple individuals, and they have an amazing program that they're really trying to work on as far as the family system, and being able to have kind of like a multidisciplinary team in each state that responds to incidences like this. And
Mm.
that makes me so happy, that there are things like that. We need that. You have to have that multidisciplinary approach. I mean, I couldn't go in and do what an attorney does. I can't go in and do what a police officer does. We can educate them, but we can't really expect them to be domestic violence professionals. So if we have a multi-disciplinary team, that really helps.
Sure. And something that I've been seeing as of recently is that government is, and I guess other funds are starting to cut support for domestic violence, right? And so now these teams can't afford to hire the professionals inside the community to support families. And then we also have some advocates who rely upon this money so much that they kind of have to like, I don't know.
And
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
you know,
Good.
with most of the agencies, and this is where it's hitting so hard on these DV agencies, because they don't charge for services. All these grant funds, go to paying the salaries of the people that can support these. And you're starting to see that programs are starting to be taken away. And one of the important programs is like legal advocacy, having a legal advocate there in court, especially initially, as far as for those orders of protection, to be able to stand there so we don't get that recantation. They have that support in court. So yeah, there's been grant funding, and I can only see that there's probably going to be more, and that's really scary.
And what can you tell a DV advocate to have the courage, right, to stand up to an attorney to say, no, you cannot do that.
Right. We I was very blessed at the agency I was at. We had some amazing legal advocates that were really kind of those bulldogs and really did stand up. And if it wasn't the advocate, it was a supervisor that was going in. She was phenomenal. And she was saying, no, this is how this works. This is how this is going to impact the survivor. This is truly what we need. And it's building those relationships with those judges and with those attorneys to where they trust you as far as what you're saying. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen with all of them, but
Mm.
if you can build that trusting working relationship, it does help.
I'm going to ask you a two-sided question. You can choose to do each one, what or whatever order you choose, and that is, what are you most excited about, In terms of the future, now that we have technology to help systematize, and then what are you most scared about, where you see that public trust is crumbling or whatever it might be? I want to get your thoughts on this.
What I'm most scared about is what we just talked about is the administration just, cutting these funds. They're vital funds that, and luckily we have those national organizations like National NNEDV. We have the different organizations that are on a national level that do lobby like that. I mean, this is a trickle down effect to housing, safety, having advocates available, having legal advocates, all those programs that can be cut that are there to support them. Our housing market is so crazy now. How can you expect somebody that comes out of an abusive relationship to pay, $1,500 in rent when she's still probably going through the cycle? So that really scares me is that we're not going to have those programs to support. What truly excites me is coercive control. It's catching on. We have about 5 states now that have laws on coercive control. I
Mm.
know Illinois had been working on it. They're trying to get the actual word in their definition. That's kind of where laws kind of stem from. So if they can get that word in the definition, so there is forward momentum in regards to that. But then we start recognizing that where's our programs to help the supporters? I think as soon as it starts to get recognized, more people are going to see, oh my gosh, I am in an abusive relationship. So those needs are going to continue to amp up. And the thing with that is we can't dismiss it as it not being lethal. Probably about, I think the statistic was 20% of domestic homicides, physical violence, the first act of physical violence was homicide. So it was all coercive control throughout the whole relationship. There was no physical violence towards them or abuse. So we need to know that it will amp up or it can amp up, and homicide can be the end result of that.
Yeah, it's homicide and suicide, right?
Yes, yes,
Because unfortunately, parents enter this place where there is no hope, right?
yep.
Every resource that they've turned to is just a dead end. So I think that's why it's critical for us, as leaders to support one another, have some of these tough conversations and help create awareness around it. So I really appreciate you being a part of this. I know you've got some resources that you might want to share, and I think you're really active on LinkedIn, and I enjoy seeing some of your posts that you put out. How can people get more from you?
Obviously LinkedIn. I am in the process of kind of starting DV consulting and education. A lot of that will hopefully be like an online platform because right now I'm kind of just focusing on Indiana since that's where I'm located, but I'm hoping, we'll have the growth and be able to take that national. So look for the website. I'll put everything on LinkedIn. I do have a flyer on there with my contact information, my email or phone number, or they can contact me through messaging on LinkedIn as well. So,
Well, that's so great, Tracy. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I know that I've taken kind of some mental notes and I'm going to come back to this, because it's like there's just so much information to learn, right? That's why we have to find each other and work with one another in order to flesh some of these issues out.
the biggest thing that I support is collaborations. We all can't be experts on any one thing, but together we can pull of our all of our expertise together and help survivors get to safety.